Hello, I'm Clive Gidney from clivegidneyphotography.com, Photography Made Simple. So at the moment we're under lockdown and we're allowed to go out once a day for a piece of exercise. So I went out on Tuesday, which was the first day we were under lockdown, for a walk, and as ever my camera goes with me everywhere. And my idea was to photograph empty streets, no people around, shuttered up shops, and that sort of thing. And I got quite a few photos like that. And when I got home, I decided I wanted to post-process them to give them that sort of post-apocalyptical look, that sort of grungy, dirty type of look that is appropriate for the present situation. And I thought I'd just share with you how I went about that. So this is one of the shots that I took. It's straight out of the camera. And what I would normally do when I'm doing any sort of post-processing technique, as it were, is I do my normal processing to get the image as it would be in a normal situation. So in this case, I put a graduated filter on the sky to bring the highlights back there, crop the image to 16:9 to give it that sort of filmic look. And so this is my starting point with the sky here and the crop on the image. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the basic panel, and all these sort of images, they tend to be a bit dull. So let's just take the exposure down a fraction. If you click on the exposure box, and then you can use your arrow key if it's on your keyboard, and I'm going to go down maybe a tenth or 0.2. Just 0.1 there for that on the exposure to bring that down, but I want to bring the contrast up. We want to increase that here, and if you click on the box and then hold the shift key while you use your arrow keys, you can go in tens. So let's go plus 30 on the contrast for there. I'll go down to the blacks and whites. If we click on the white slider and hold down the Alt key, the image will go black, and it will show you as you move the slider where the clipping points are. But there's actually no whites clipped in that image, so I'm going to leave the whites as they are. If we do the same with the blacks, we've got a little bit of clipping on the blacks. I want to take that down a bit further, so let's go down with the blacks to say -20, so we're getting a bit of clipping there. We're now going to go to the shadows and highlights. Again, we haven't got much highlights here, but again, we want to bring the highlights, any that are there, down a bit. Let's go down about -40 on there. And these sliders are guides for you. It will depend on your images. But having increased the contrast, we now just want to open up the shadows a bit. And I'm going to go about there, which is what, +29, +30 on the shadows. From there, we're going to go down to the presence panel, and if you're using the latest version of Lightroom, you'll have texture and clarity. These two are both sharpening type tools. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the texture up because I want to give it quite a gritty, sort of grainy feel. So let's take the texture up to about 75, and let's bring the clarity up, and we can start to see the grit appearing in the road and on the buildings there. And I'm probably going to go to perhaps 55 or 60 on the clarity there. We also want to reduce the saturation because in this sort of post-apocalypse you tend to get a lot of dust in the air. So let's take the vibrance down, take that right down to there, say just under 70, something like that. We'll also take the saturation down, not as much as that, so that the colour is leaching out of the image, but we're just still leaving a little bit in the blues and the reds there on the brickwork. So that is our basic panel. We're then going to go to the tone curve because we want to lift the blacks. So we'll click on the center there to fix that point. If we click on the center of the tone curve, we're also going to click on the 25% of the tone curve. Then we're going to take the 0 point and start lifting it up, and you can see that the blacks become quite sort of muddy, which is the effect that we want. So we'll leave that about there and actually take the 25 point down a little bit there on that curve. We can also put a point up on the 3/4 point just to flatten the curve out, because otherwise it tends to bend that there. We're now going to go down to the hue, saturation and luminance panel, and while you're on saturation, we want to boost the reds, oranges and yellows, and each of those we're probably going to want to go to +20 to 30. The exact figures, again, will depend on your images, but what we're trying to do is start to bring a bit of colour back into the brickwork on the buildings, which we've done. But then we're going to take all the other sliders and take the saturation down somewhere around 40 to 50. And again, these will depend on your images, so these are a starting point. You'll need to play with those to taste. So we've got an image there that's not quite monochrome. We're now going to go to the split toning panel, and if you move the we've got highlights and shadows, and we're going to tone the highlights with a sort of sepia tone and the shadows blue. But if you move the hue slider around, you'll see absolutely nothing happen in your image until you add any saturation to it. So I'm just going to add a saturation of 20% so we can see what we're doing, and we'll then play with that afterwards. Now I'm going to move the hue, and I probably want sepia is around the 50 to 60 mark, so that's about the point there, but I want to increase that saturation, so let's just take that up to about 50 as well. So we've now got that really sort of dirty yellow in the sky there and the whites on the buildings. Similarly, the shadows, again, let's put some saturation in the shadows so we can see what we're doing. About 20 there. Take the hue, and we want blue here, so we're going to want a hue figure of somewhere around 230, 235, something like that. In terms of saturation, probably a little bit more than I've got there, probably about 25. There we go. So now we've got this sort of blue colour in the road, but we've got too much yellow in the sky. So take the balance slider now and offset that towards the shadows. Now we see we've got a bit of blue appearing in the sky. That's good, that's what we want. So let's go minus 35, 36 on there. And again, that will depend on your image. So that we've now split toned it. We now need to sharpen the image. We want quite a lot of sharpening again for that gritty feel, so I'm going to take the amount slider up to perhaps 65, 70, something like that. But I'm going to mask it off a bit, so if we hold the Alt key, click on the masking thing and slider, and as you move the slider across you can see what's being affected and what's not being affected. And white is sharpened and black is not, and I'm going to go there, mask it off to about there. Again, it'll depend on your image. I've gone to 30. The last thing we want to do to really give it that gritty effect is to add some grain to the image. Now, to some extent, the amount of grain you put on the sliders will depend on your image size sensor. Now, I'm using a 20 megapixel sensor, and it will also depend on what size you're outputting your image to. I'm going to output mine at 1600 pixels along the longest side to post on Facebook. So for the amount, I'm going to go fairly strong on the amount of grain here. I'm going to go up to, say, 65. You can start seeing it appear in the sky there. I'm going to increase the size of the grain from the standard 25. Let's go up to about 45 there. Again, we can see that. And let's increase the roughness from the standard 50, go up to about 60. You'll want to play with those figures depending on your image, but I wanted this grainy feel in the sky. The last thing we want to do is add a vignette, and I've got some vignettes here in my presets. Low, medium. The medium's a bit too strong, the low's not quite strong enough. Let's click on the low one and then just move the amount slider up. So I've gone to about 14 on the amount there, midpoint 48, roundness minus 43. But again, it will depend on your image and your image size. So there you have it. That's how I give my images that post-apocalyptical feel. It's difficult to say that. But have a play with that technique. Again, those sliders and settings that I've given you are a starting point, but it will get you somewhere near that sort of effect. So have a play, have some fun with that, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.